My wife cheated on me for 4 months with Marcus. I divorced her and cut all contact. But 3 years later, her parents begged me to visit her in the hospital because she's dying. What I did left them speechless. I'm 34 years old. I work in corporate finance, and 3 years ago I divorced my wife after discovering she had been cheating on me for months, and I thought I had finally closed that chapter of my life, that I had turned the page and all that. But it turns out the universe has a pretty twisted sense of humor, because, like 2 weeks ago, I ran into my ex's parents at the grocery store, and they asked me to go visit her at the hospital where she's dying from injuries from a car accident. And honestly, I don't even know where to start with all this because my family is divided. Some say I'm a heartless monster, and others say I did the right thing by standing firm. So, I guess I need to tell the whole story from the beginning for it to make sense. Melissa and I met when we were like 20 years old. We were classmates in college, we studied different majors but had mutual friends, and basically hung out at the same parties and events. We were together 7 years before getting married. I mean, we practically grew up together as a couple. You know what I mean? When we got married, I was 29 and she was 27, and everything seemed perfect, like we were that couple that all our friends looked at and said, I wish I had something like that. We'd been married 2 years when everything went to hell. We had literally just started planning to have kids. We were looking at bigger houses and better neighborhoods. I had just received a major promotion at work, and she was happy in her position as a graphic designer for a mid-sized agency. I honestly thought we were building something solid, something that was going to last a lifetime, you know, the American dream and all that shit. But looking back, I should have seen the signs. Although I guess you never want to see what you don't want to see. Melissa started coming home late from work more frequently, like before she'd arrive at 6 or 7 and suddenly it was 9, 10 at night. She'd tell me they had projects with tight deadlines, that her boss was a mess organizing time. Things that sounded reasonable at the time. She also started being more attached to her phone. She'd take it to the bathroom, put it face down on the table, get nervous if I came close when she was texting. When I'd ask her, she'd say it was work, drama, or problems with her friends. And I, like an idiot, believed her because I trusted her completely, because I'd never had reasons to doubt. The way I found out was probably the most cliché of all. It's almost funny how predictable it sounds. It was a Saturday morning. She was in the shower, and her phone started ringing on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have even looked, but that day for some reason I did, and I saw the name Marcus on the screen with a message that said something like, "Can't stop thinking about last night." And there my brain kind of clicked, you know? All those late arrivals, all those excuses, everything started fitting together in a horrible way. I grabbed her phone, like my hands. They were shaking and I felt like I was going to throw up. I unlocked the screen because I knew her password. We were that kind of couple that supposedly had no secrets. And I opened the conversation with Marcus. I'm not going to go into all the details of what I read because honestly it was too much, but basically they'd been seeing each other for like 4 months. They had encounters at his apartment when I thought she was working late. They had gone together to a hotel on the outskirts of the city one weekend when she supposedly had gone to visit a college friend. The messages were explicit, intimate. The kind of things you say to someone when you're in love or at least very into something. The worst part wasn't even the sexual aspect. It was reading things like, "I miss you," or "Can't wait to see you," or "Wish I could stay with you all night," because that meant it wasn't just casual sex. It was a complete parallel relationship to our marriage. When Melissa came out of the shower, I was sitting on the bed with her phone in my hand. She saw me, and her face went completely white. She literally looked like she'd seen a ghost. She asked me what I was doing with her phone, and I just said, "Who's Marcus?" Just like that. She tried to deny it at first, told me he was a coworker and that the messages were taken out of context. But I had already read enough to know that was a lie. I showed her some of the most compromising messages, and she basically fell apart, started crying and asking for forgiveness. Told me it had been a horrible mistake, that she loved me, that Marcus meant nothing. All the typical phrases people say when they get caught doing something unforgivable. I remember I sat there without saying anything, for what felt like an eternity, just watching her cry and beg. Part of me wanted to yell at her, another part wanted to cry too. But what I felt most was like a strange emptiness in my chest, like something had broken inside me and I didn't know how to fix it, or if I even wanted to fix it. I asked her how many times they'd been together, where, when, if she'd ever thought about me while she was with him. Melissa answered some things, but basically just cried more and said she was so sorry that she'd do anything to fix it. What followed were like 2 horrible weeks where she tried to prove to me we could save the marriage, and I had basically already decided I didn't want to try, but didn't know how to tell her. Or maybe part of me still had hope even, though I didn't want to admit it. I slept in the guest room. She'd leave me notes saying she loved me, cook my favorite meals, text me during the day explaining that she had ended everything with Marcus and that I was all that mattered. But every time I saw her, all I could think about was her with him. All the times she had lied to me. All the nights she'd come home late smelling of fresh perfume like she'd just showered somewhere else. In the end, I talked to a lawyer and started the divorce process. We had a prenuptial agreement that basically protected the assets each of us had brought into the marriage and equitably divided what we had acquired together. So legally it was relatively simple, although emotionally it was a mess. Melissa tried to convince me until the last moment not to do it. Her parents, Nancy and Charles, also called me several times, asking me to give her another chance. That everyone makes mistakes, that marriage requires work and forgiveness. I told them I respected their position as her parents, but that my decision was made, that I wasn't going to live the rest of my life wondering if my wife was being faithful or not. The divorce was finalized about 6 months after I discovered the infidelity. I kept our apartment because, technically, I had bought it before getting married, although we had lived there together. She went to live with her parents for a while until she found her own place. I blocked her number, deleted her from all my social media, told our mutual friends I didn't want to know anything about her or receive updates about her life. I basically tried to erase her from my existence as completely as possible, and for 3 years that worked pretty well. I started therapy about 2 months after the divorce because honestly I wasn't handling the whole cheating thing well. I had trouble sleeping. I struggled to trust any woman I tried to date. I was basically carrying a lot of anger and resentment that I didn't know how to process. My therapist, a lady around 50 years old, pretty grounded, helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't something I had to give to Melissa, but something I had to do for myself to be able to move forward. It took me a long time to get to a point where I could think about everything that happened without feeling like my chest was going to explode from fury. I dated some women during those 3 years. Nothing serious, a couple of relationships that lasted a few months but never went anywhere deep, because frankly, I was still working on myself and wasn't ready to commit to someone again. My friends told me I was wasting my best years being bitter, that I needed to get over it and move on. But the truth is, you get over things at your own pace. You know what I mean? It's not like a switch you can turn on and off when it's convenient. So, like 2 weeks ago, I was at the grocery store on a Tuesday night, like at 9, because I'd left work late and needed to buy some basic stuff. And while I was in the cereal aisle, I see Nancy and Charles, Melissa's parents. I tried to turn around and leave the aisle before they saw me, but Nancy had already seen me and called my name. I stood there with a box of Cheerios in my hand thinking, shit, this is going to be awkward. They approached me, and at first it was that super artificial exchange of, "Hi, how have you been? You look good." "We're fine, thanks for asking." But then Nancy told me she needed to talk to me about something important, that it was about Melissa. I told them honestly I didn't want to know anything about her, that I appreciated them approaching me, but that I preferred to maintain that distance. Charles then told me that Melissa had been in a car accident like a week ago, that she was in the hospital, and that she had asked for me, that she wanted to see me. The way they told me was like they expected me to immediately drop everything and run to the hospital or something. But the truth is, I stood there without feeling much of anything. I asked them if she was okay, and Nancy started crying, told me no, that the injuries were serious, that the doctors weren't sure if she was going to survive. And I don't know what they expected me to say to that, but all I felt was like a strange mix of pity for them as parents and complete indifference toward Melissa as a person. I told them I was sorry to hear that, but that I didn't plan to go visit her, that we had closed that chapter 3 years ago and I didn't see the point of reopening it now. Charles tried to appeal to my sense of compassion or whatever, told me that regardless of what had happened between Melissa and me, she had been my wife, that we had shared years of our lives together, that she deserved at least a visit. And that's where I basically exploded. I told them that Melissa had destroyed our marriage with her decisions, that I didn't owe her anything, that if she wanted peace or closure or whatever, she should have thought about it before getting in bed with another guy. I told them. And this sounds horrible now that I'm writing it, but I said it at that moment, that as far as I was concerned, Melissa could rot in that hospital bed. Nancy got hysterical, started yelling at me that I was a cruel and heartless man, that how could I be so cold with someone who was dying, that she had always thought I was a good person, but that she had clearly been wrong. Charles tried to calm her down, but he was obviously angry too, told me that someday I understand what true forgiveness is, and that he hoped I would never have to face the same kind of coldness I was showing. I left the shopping cart right there in the aisle and left the grocery store, got in my car, and sat in the parking lot for like half an hour trying to process what had just happened. I thought that would end everything there, but it turns out Nancy and Charles decided to contact my family to pressure me into going to see Melissa. My sister, Rebecca, called me the next day and told me that Melissa's parents had contacted her, that they had told her about the accident and about my refusal to visit her. Rebecca tried to convince me I should reconsider, not for Melissa but for myself, to have closure or something like that. I explained to her that I already had all the closure I needed, that I had worked on that issue in therapy for years, and that seeing Melissa again wasn't going to change anything. But Rebecca insisted, told me she understood why I was angry, but that forgiveness was important, that holding a grudge only hurt me, basically the whole speech you hear when people want you to do something you don't want to do. I told her I had forgiven Melissa in the sense that I no longer carried hatred toward her, but that forgiving didn't mean I had to be present in her life or her death. Rebecca didn't agree, and told me I was being selfish, to think about what Melissa was going through, that no one deserves to die feeling unforgiven. We ended the call on bad terms, like she was frustrated with me, and I was frustrated with her for not respecting my decision. What really made everything worse was when my parents got involved in the matter. My dad, Joseph, called me a day later and asked me to go get coffee. We went to a coffee shop near his house, and he basically gave me this long speech about forgiveness and compassion. But then he dropped something I didn't know. He told me that my mom, Dorothy, had cheated on him like 20 years ago, when I was like 14 years old, that she had an affair with a coworker that lasted several months. I sat there unable to believe it, like processing this information about my parents that I had never known. My dad explained that he had forgiven my mom, that they had worked on their marriage with couples therapy, and that they had managed to rebuild their relationship. He told me he understood my pain, but that I should consider being more compassionate with Melissa, especially now that she was in such a vulnerable situation. And that's where I exploded with him. I told him that his situation and mine were completely different, that he had chosen to forgive and stay with Mom, and I had chosen not to forgive and divorce Melissa, and that both decisions were valid. I asked him if he expected me to follow his example just because he had done it that way, if he thought his way of handling infidelity was the only correct one. My dad got defensive and told me he was just trying to help me see things from another perspective, but I was too angry to listen to him reasonably. I told him it seemed hypocritical that he had never told me about Mom's infidelity, but that now he was using it as justification to pressure me to do something I didn't want to do. We left that coffee shop without having resolved anything, and since then things have been tense between us. My mom called me that same night, like I already knew my dad had told her about our conversation. I expected her to also try to convince me to go see Melissa, but surprisingly, she told me she supported my decision, that she understood why I had chosen divorce instead of forgiveness, and that not all marriages or situations are the same. She explained that she and my dad had managed to overcome their crisis because they both wanted to, because she had made a genuine effort to change and rebuild trust, and because my dad had been willing to give her that chance. She told me that in my case, I hadn't wanted to give Melissa that chance, and that was completely okay, that it was my decision and no one had the right to judge me for it. It was weird hearing my mom admit her infidelity so directly, like my whole image of my parents as this perfect couple had crumbled in 2 conversations. But it also made me feel validated somehow, because she understood both sides of the situation, both the person who cheats and the person cheated on, and still supported my decision to stay away from Melissa. About another week passed and I thought all the drama had ended, that Nancy and Charles had given up on their attempts to make me change my mind. But then I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize, but turned out to be Melissa's new number. The message said something like, "Andrew, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need to tell you something before it's too late. Please give me 5 minutes of your time." I read it and left it on read, didn't respond and wasn't planning to. But that night my mom called me and told me she had talked to Nancy, that basically Melissa was dying, that the doctors had given her maybe one more week to live, that the internal injuries from the accident had been too severe and her body was failing. My mom told me she still supported whatever decision I made, but that she wanted to make sure I knew all the information before deciding, because this was probably my last chance to see Melissa if I wanted to do it. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake until 2 in the morning, going over everything in my head. Part of me kept thinking I didn't owe Melissa anything, that she had made her bed and now had to lie in it, so to speak. But another part of me, probably the part my therapist had worked so hard on developing, told me that maybe going to see her wasn't for her but for me, to truly close that chapter without unanswered questions or pending issues. At 2:30 in the morning, I got up, got dressed, grabbed my car keys, and drove to the hospital where Melissa was. The hospital was like 45 minutes from my house, and the whole way I was debating whether to turn around or not. I got to the parking lot and sat in my car for another 30 minutes. Literally sitting there, looking at the hospital building, and wondering what the hell I was doing. I finally went in, asked at reception for Melissa's room. They gave me a visitor's pass and I went up to the 3rd floor. I walked down that hospital hallway that smells like disinfectant and sickness and stopped in front of her room door. I knocked softly and heard a weak voice say, "Come in." I opened the door, and there was Melissa, connected to a bunch of machines, with a pale and haggard face, basically unrecognizable from the woman I had married years ago. We looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity without saying anything. She started crying and told me, "Thank you for coming. I didn't think you would." I stood by the door, not knowing what to do with my hands or where to look. I asked her how she was, and she laughed a little, a bitter laugh, and told me obviously not very well. I told her I had heard about the accident and that I was sorry she was going through this. And it was true. I mean, I didn't wish anyone harm, even if that person had hurt me. Melissa then told me she knew she had no right to ask me for anything, but that she needed to apologize to me face to face, that she had carried the guilt of what she did to me for 3 years and didn't want to die without having told me she was truly sorry. She explained that she had been in therapy too, that she had worked on understanding why she had cheated, that it hadn't been for lack of love toward me, but for her own problems with insecurity and seeking external validation. She told me she knew that didn't justify anything, but that she wanted me to know she had changed, that she had become a better person even though it was too late to prove it to me. I told her I appreciated her apology, that honestly I didn't hate her or hold a grudge like before, but that I also couldn't tell her I forgave her in the sense of forgetting what happened or pretending it never occurred. I explained that what she did fundamentally changed the way I saw relationships and trust, that it had taken me years of therapy to get to a point where I could even consider committing to someone again. Melissa nodded and told me she understood, that she didn't expect my forgiveness, but that she needed to know that I knew how much she regretted hurting me. We talked for another 10 minutes about more superficial things, about how my life had been these 3 years, about her work and her friends. It was strangely normal considering the circumstances, like we were catching up like old acquaintances instead of ex-spouses with a complicated history. When I got up to leave, Melissa said thank you again, that it meant a lot to her that I had come. I told her to take care of herself, although we both knew that wasn't going to happen, and left that room. Melissa died 4 days after that visit. My mom called to tell me that Nancy had contacted her to inform her. I didn't go to the funeral. I sent flowers and a note to Nancy and Charles expressing my condolences, but kept my distance. Some of my relatives thought that was cold. Others understood that I needed to maintain those boundaries, even after her death. The truth is, I don't know if I did the right thing visiting her at the hospital. Part of me thinks it was good to give that closure to both her and myself, but another part thinks I simply gave in to family and social pressure. What I do know is that, after that visit, I felt like a weight I didn't know I was carrying had been lifted. Like, I could finally think about that whole chapter of my life, without feeling that horrible mix of rage and betrayal I felt before. It's been like 2 weeks since the funeral, and things with my family are slowly returning to normal. My dad and I still haven't had a real conversation about the whole thing with my mom's infidelity and how that affected his perspective on my situation, But I guess that's something we'll have to work on eventually. Rebecca called me a few days ago and told me she was proud of me for going to see Melissa despite how difficult it must have been. And I told her honestly, I still wasn't sure if I had done the right thing. Last week I started dating someone new, a woman I met through mutual friends. It's early still, like we've only had like 3 dates, but there's something different this time, like I'm finally ready to really try again. She knows about Melissa and the divorce. I told her on our second date because I felt I needed to be honest about my past, and she told me she appreciated my transparency and that we all have history and baggage we carry. I don't know what's going to happen with this new relationship or if it's going to go anywhere, but for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm open to the possibility of trusting someone that way again. And I guess that's the closest thing to a happy ending I'm going to have for now, that after all this mess and drama and pain, I'm finally in a place where I can look forward without constantly looking back. I'm not going to pretend I've completely overcome everything, or that there aren't days where I still think about what happened and feel angry or betrayed. But those days are becoming less frequent, and when they come, they no longer consume me the way they used to. At the end of the day, no one can tell you how to handle your pain or your betrayal or your healing process. My dad chose to forgive and stay. I chose not to forgive at that moment and divorce. And both decisions were valid for our specific situations. There's no right way to respond when someone destroys your trust that way. There's only the way that works for you, and that allows you to move forward with your life without loading yourself with bitterness or resentment forever. And I think finally, after all, I'm starting to truly understand that.